Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry again, it's been another big delay. Not trying to do that, it's just life's busy. But today, we're going to cover the Deep Thoughts way, either you can call it the Black Pyramid or the Dark Pyramid. It tends to be called the Black Pyramid by pedestrians and Dark Pyramid, allegedly inside the government. If you've never seen a Deep Thoughts radio show before, I only say radio because I had a radio show before this, and it distinguishes me from all the other Deep Thoughts 4 video channels out there. We go into things in great detail, and we go into all the associated stories that tend to travel with any other existing story. So this is going to be far more than just repeating all of the stuff that everyone else has already said beautifully online. There's no need for me to make another video strictly to repeat what's already been out there. We're going to look into stuff because on Deep Thoughts Radio, we've done Men in Black episodes. We've done the most exhaustive Men in Black episode, I think. We've done Pyramids Generating Power episode, the ones in Giza, with all of the accoutrement that you might want to go and explore at a future point. This show is designed to equip you with what you need to either validate or invalidate any particular claim. This is not going to be some debunk episode where I'm trying to, discount everything. We will get into the skepticism of what one claim is over another, okay? But we're going to go at this from a couple different perspectives. I looked at several videos on this. Some of them were really nicely done. But it's amazing how there are not dedicated websites to this in any official realm. Even ChatGPT is pretty... It actually suggested this to me a long time ago, and I said, hey, give me 30 ideas. It would be fun to do. I think about 28 of them we've already done. But it suggested this one a long time ago. I had heard this. It's been going around. And then, of course, you're kind of like, well, it doesn't sound that interesting. It's pretty interesting. So let's get started. So online, there are a few different claims about where this story starts. Who saw it first and who was able to get sort of an idea of what this thing is. But just to cover this real quickly, there's a big state in America that's twice the size of Texas, and it's called Alaska, right? Is the third largest reserve of oil in the world, first being off the coast of Scotland, undiscovered, but owned by BP, and the other one's off the coast of Brazil. Kind of discovered, but not being drilled at this point. There's a town up there called Denali, and there's a place called, I think, McGrath. If you travel southwest from Denali, but just before you get to this McGrath place, it's kind of where this place is. Finding the GPS coordinates for this is pretty easy to do, but it's very uneventful because when you look at it in Google Earth, there's nothing there. One man actually flew a plane out to it because he was the son of one of the men we're going to discuss, and he was able to video a pretty big clearing. Plus, they found an old derelict aircraft landing strip, plus an ancient road, ancient being maybe 2 or 3 decades old, kind of like seeded to be covered up naturally. And the nearest road from that point is 100 miles away, 150 miles away. But this is the story of a pyramid that is apparently 700 feet below ground. You'll hear all kinds of different numbers, but one of the most vivid claims by a person who says he actually worked on it, at least the son of one of these men, said it was 700 feet underground. They make a big thing that it's bigger than the Pyramid of Giza, and it is. It's 100 feet taller than the Pyramid of Giza, which is about 450, and this thing's 550 feet. It's made of a black stone. Black stone in most areas of the world is basalt rock, which comes out of a volcano, and there are gigantic basalt rocks all over Egypt that we think come from Lebanon, as well as Lebanon has red granite that we think came from Egypt. And how they move this rock, some of them weighing potentially as much as 100 tons, if not 1,000 tons before they're carved, is really beyond comprehension. Even 10 tons is just unbelievable, right? But this pyramid, way underneath the ground, okay, the shortest distance I've ever heard claimed was 150 feet below ground. But the men who rode the elevators down say it was 700 and potentially 70 feet down. Okay, it's just where it is because that's where it is. They say it generates power. They say it generates enough power that it could power a whole continent. Like all of America could live off this one generator. And that's what we've always said on this show. Once some electrical engineers studied the pyramids of Giza in around 2010, or at least that's when the BBC documentary came out, which then was re-aired on Netflix. I said, look, this thing generates power, but it's been taken apart because all the rocks on the outside have been taken off, and that completes the circuit, which is why all of them are stripped down to their interior rocks except that little cap on the Great Pyramid of Giza. The whole thing hit the deck. I mean, in terms of us knowing anything about this, in a Coast to Coast AM interview with Art Bell and a very famous ufologist, Linda Howe, Howe. She talked about this pyramid and the stories that led up to this. And so we're going to talk about the stories as they unfold. And it's interesting because we have really two, I think, fairly credible claims. And there's another video out there that looks like a History's Mysteries thing where they're pretty much filming this guy with one of those voice-over, scramblers. And he's talking about having discovered it through maps in 1983 before there was any map technology for us to play with. But a gentleman by the name of, I think I'm going to say his name right, Doug Mutschler, was stationed in Fort Richardson, and he was a counterintelligence person looking for acts of espionage against the United States government. Now, this guy is natively from Ohio, and he's been flown to Alaska to work. And the challenge there is that he doesn't know the terrain. And I will just tell you, for anyone who doesn't live in America, we really don't know. If you grow up in the 50 states down below, the 49 states down below, you don't know much about Hawaii unless you fly there, and you don't know much about Alaska, even if you do travel there and you go to Anchorage, Alaska, because it is such a gigantic, formidable space of land, meaning there's lots of mountains and streams, and the only guys I know that go there routinely are guys that fly fish. They love it, and obviously it's gorgeous. There's tons of cruise ships that go by the coast, so you can take a look at it. But there's a lot of danger up there, and thousands of people disappear every year in Alaska. And some people like to associate that with potentially a lot of the military operations that are up there. Some military folks have said, and this isn't a big whistleblower thing, but they said, look, there's so much military activity in Alaska that during a nuclear war, what people don't understand is that Alaska is going to get flattened faster and more efficiently than the main continent, where you just have a lot of residential, and there are a few military bases, obviously. But it's 700,000 square miles up there, which again is 2 times the size of Texas. So this Doug guy, he needs to learn about Alaska. He really needs to figure out what's there. So when someone says an anomaly is happening there, or we're going to go to this base here, we're thinking about building here, he knows. If somebody says Russian troops are in this one location, he's got to know off the top of his head exactly the click on the map, exactly where that is, right? So he starts studying the maps of Alaska in the 89 when he arrives. Everything looks pretty legit. He's committing everything to memory. But there's this weird area, kind of like Area 51. It says on there, area not surveyed to date. And it's this little area on the map. And he's thinking, now wait a minute. Why would this arbitrary place in Alaska not be mapped? That doesn't make any sense. We have the technology. We fly planes over. We take pictures. We gather it all together. And we would know. We wouldn't want a place that wasn't mapped because that's a security threat to the country. What if the foreign groups land in that unmapped area? Well, they could do whatever the heck they wanted to. Well, that's because the truth of the matter is this was an area where something was happening. Something. Almost certainly happening. Then a freak thing occurs that sets this whole thing off for Doug. Okay? China on I think October 2nd, 1992, sets off a gigantic nuclear bomb underground. Now again, you have claims that certain countries have achieved nuclear weapons, and then you look at their inability to manufacture things like F-35 engines. But they have the technology to create fission in the form of an atomic bomb. Those two inabilities, the ability to create a nuclear bomb and set it off, and the inability to create an F-35 Raptor engine in about 2016, 2017, almost precludes the other claim from being true. But what is a test that's explosive? Well, making things like nitroglycerin, C4, and a bunch of other plastic explosives is very capable. You can just buy that stuff off the black market. The United States government, as you know, with atomic bombs, they also created tons of silo tests where they simply filled it with metric tons of TNT and then blew it up, and it looked exactly like an atom bomb. And that's why a lot of folks online are skeptical about the existence of atom bombs and really say it's probably just a threat to make people feel uneasy. Now, they have different explanations for Hiroshima and Nagasaki because they were firebombed incessantly before these two bombs were actually dropped on them. So what they think is that you're looking at the firebomb residuals after they dropped another big bomb, okay? But, like 80,000 people supposedly vaporized in Hiroshima. So it's kind of hard to account for that, right? Maybe it was a firebomb and they were hiding all the deaths because they didn't want to lose face because that was kind of country it was. And they were losing the war and didn't want to say. I got a whole episode on that. You can find it on deepthoughtsradio.com. Do atomic bombs exist if you want to go see that? I do have a very close friend of mine who's 81 years old today who was born in 1944, and he lived in Hiroshima from the late 40s to the early 50s as a child and did not suffer any radiation poisoning or anything like that. He saw the destruction and all that, so that's kind of odd that there was never any residual problems with that. But this bomb is set off underground. That much we know. When something gigantic is set off underground, like a big bomb of any kind, it sends out massive shock waves. And then when we have sensor equipment that's actually picking up on these waves, just antennas and what have you, anything that blocks that wave, like an X-ray, right? An X-ray is you got a piece of film and you stand in front of it, and the X-rays your body, and what gets exposed turns black. And what doesn't get exposed, which is blocked by bone, stays white on the X-ray. That's how they figured out. And grayscale will give you information about contour, the roundness of a bone. Okay? Well, the claim is that this thing left a huge fingerprint of a triangle. Because even though it is buried potentially up to 770 feet underground, it's also elevated above sea level. So Doug is up at night and he's in a room with about 40 other soldiers. They're just watching the news, nothing special. But the local news agency drops the story, according to him and the 40 other guys, that this anomaly was sensed in some sort of radar antenna right after the explosion occurred, like instantaneously just basically telegraphed this shape in the ground. And it was some weird mystery that it was underground. They didn't know how far down, but it came up. And so he's like, wow, that's wild. So he listens to the show, which kind of gave the general location of where this thing had occurred. I'm sure it didn't give GPS coordinates on the radio program, but he goes back to the map room and starts to kind of piece it together and realizes, oh my God, it's in that weird unsurveyed area. Okay, this is how it gets started. This is how the Howl woman got this story. Okay. So, no big deal. He's going to record the show's rebroadcast later that night. He puts a VHS tape in, hits record, records the news, and the story is completely gone. No mention of it at all. Now, he has a pretty good clearance. He is working in this kind of sort of counter-espionage area. So he's like, you know what, I'm just going to go down to the radio station and see if I can't get a copy of the show that I saw and all my buddies saw. So he goes down to the station, the news station, And he goes to the director of the station. He says, look, I want to get a copy of that program. And we don't have that, He goes, well, I saw a story about a pyramid, excuse me, not a black pyramid, but a pyramid that showed up in a radar after this nuclear test. And they said, well, that's weird. I don't remember that at all. There's no story like that at all. And so obviously he knows he's being lied to, and because he's in military, he understands sort of the countermeasures that can take place to get rid of a story. So he's kind of obviously sensing, okay, someone got to this guy. All right. He tries to play a little dumb. He says, that was just an interesting story. I want to get that. So he's he's leaving the station because he's completely confused what the hell happened. And one of the younger men who works there whispers to him and says, hey, that story is real. It aired. But what you don't know is that after it aired, we had two sort of men in black guys come in, take that dude you were talking to into a room, and basically read him the riot act, and we had to give up all of the recordings, master recordings of that particular show, and we're told to kill the story. And then that guy comes out, officially the editor of the news station, and said, we're killing this story. So everyone's kind of on edge. And of course, at that point, he's really playing dumb. Oh, that's weird. I just thought it was interesting. I'm not that interested in it. And he walks off, right? So that was 1992. So he plays it cool, but he's like, well, he's also, he subscribes to the, the concept of need to know information. And if he's not getting informed about it, he's good with it. Yeah, it's probably just something, right? But it kind of gnawed at him, right? So in 1993, he gets stationed in Maryland. Not only Maryland, but Fort Meade, Maryland, which is the headquarters of the NSA. He claimed he didn't work for them, but for an outside agency that reported to them. But he's got pretty good clearance. And he is, still on, I guess, on target for, what's going on in Alaska. So he goes into archives. And apparently in 93, because we don't have a huge, internet database thing, it's probably all electronic now. Although it's nice to keep it paper form only because if anything's secret, you'd have to physically raid the building to get the information. But he goes to archives and he's like, is there a section in here about archaeological digs and finds in Alaska? And the guy's like, oh yeah, it's aisle this, row that, box this, whatever. All right. So he goes in, he grabs the whole section on this. He's very excited. He goes off into a secure room to review the information because that's how all these places are set up. Before he can read anything, two men in black show up behind him and tell him, you don't need to know this information. You're not going to be reviewing this, and it's time for you to leave the building. Because again, he doesn't work there. He's an outside consultant, so that kind of checks out with his story. So as they're talking to him, he's like, hey, I'm just looking for anything that's interesting. It's, I was responsible for Alaska. He didn't make it clear whether he was still, working on that division. And they told him right then and there, according to his story, we know what you're looking for, and you don't need to know anything about that. And then they say something very key, according to Doug. They say, they don't want us messing with them, and we don't want them messing with us. And then he says, who's them? And they realize they had said too much, and they kick him out. Them's going to get real interesting. Okay, we'll get into this, okay? Now, that's the extent of this Doug Mutschler guy. He then contacts this Howell woman. She validates his entire portfolio, looks at his DD214 form, finds out that he was who he said he was, worked for the agencies that he said he worked for, and this is when she goes on Art Bell's show, Coast to Coast AM. But we're going to go back in time now. The year is a little indiscriminate, but this story comes from the son of a guy named Marty B. Johnson. Marty B. Johnson, I think they said that he worked on the Manhattan Project. Okay, so he had incredible clearance, and he was an electrical engineer. He's flown. After the Manhattan Project gets finished, they keep these assets because they're prized possessions, right? It'd be like, firing Oppenheimer after he gets done with the atomic bomb, right? They keep these guys on the payroll. So this Marty B. Johnson says that he's flown to kind of an obscure town on the west coast of Alaska, along with some other physicists who he's not familiar with, from what I understand. They're just other guys like him. And they put him in a bus. And the bus is completely blacked out. And they go for a 6-hour bumpy-ass ride east. He can kind of tell because there's ocean on one side and there's only one place to go. And he didn't feel like he had changed, directions much, okay? And this is where it gets interesting. We got a guy going in, as opposed to this Doug guy who's observing it from the outside and trying to piece it together and getting cock-blocked by the men in black. This dude's going in to work on it. All right? That's the claim. And this comes from his son. All right? So he says they travel 6 hours inland. They get out of this bus, and they're immediately snowblind because the whole place is covered with snow. It's formidable territory, just forest and mountains and streams. There's nothing there. There's no base. And he said that it was so blinding that it took him a while to walk towards a voice. In the daytime, he said that, the wind and the freezing cold was just, they couldn't be out here much longer or they're going to have physical problems, hypothermia and that kind of stuff. But they walked forward and they see this little tiny building. There's a couple guys there and they get waved into the building. This is almost like Andromeda Strain, if you've ever seen that movie, a Michael Crichton masterpiece, okay, from 1973. And I cover that movie in this show, in this channel here. But they go inside and it's an elevator. It's a big one, big industrial freight elevator. And they all start going down and down and down. And they're really just thawing out from being outside. He said, immediately it got a lot warmer in there. He said you could still see your breath in the elevator. And he says he's in there so long, he even daydreams, right? Until the point where he's like, oh my God, we've been going down for a really long distance, right? Well, the elevator door opens up. They look out the elevator and they pretty much see a military base. Not base as in buildings, but they're inside a building that looks very military. Tile walls, everything's clean and nice. Fluorescent lamps all the way down, buzzing like crazy. All the doors lack any names. They just have numbers on them. Very clean, very efficient, as one YouTuber said, and I think that's right. But they get marched into this place. They walk a ways, and then this commander raises his voice and says, okay, there's a 4-week acclimation to this location. 4 weeks. Go watch Andromeda Strain. I think it took 6 days to get to the patient zeros in the basement. All this physical detoxing and stuff, right? It's a fictional movie, okay? But this one, he finishes talking about it. He's like, before we start your 4-week orientation here, you're going to see, I'm going to show you what you're going to be working on. He takes him around a corner, and there's a gigantic door, big, giant steel door. He said he estimated the door's height at 15 feet by 1 foot thick. Now, if it's 15 foot tall, you would imagine that the width would be at least probably twice that because all these people walk in. It's a big hangar door sort of thing, right? Well, the guy gets on a red phone. It's on the wall right next to the door. Of course, he's telling him to open the door. And he said it was quite an event just to open the door. All kinds of contraptions and steel sounds, and they're opening this door. I know that's romantic, but let's just go with it. But he says as soon as they go in there, there's a gigantic cavern. The impression was that they didn't dig the cavern. The cavern was discovered. And inside there was this gigantic pyramid. Now, most of you have seen a picture of the Great Pyramid of Giza. You have seen people standing next to what is estimated at 2.3 million stones to 2.5 million stones. It's the heaviest object that man has ever put together, okay? By several orders of magnitude, okay? Maybe a gigantic skyscraper gets close to the metric tons of this. And we're not even talking about the plateau it's built on, which they don't mention anything about that in this entire story about the Dark Pyramid. but it seems like it would have to have the same configuration, which is a gigantic plateau, taller, has to be taller than the pyramid itself, otherwise the pyramid would crush it, no matter what this thing's made out of. But 550 feet tall. That is 10 stories over the Great Pyramid. 10 stories, all right? Now, for those of you who live in gigantic cities with big 10-story buildings and 100-story buildings, that's no big deal. But if you live in a rural town, your tallest building might be 10 to 20 stories. So just go look at one. And that's how much higher it is than the Great Pyramid. Now, when they talked about what was going on in this room, obviously they're saying that this pyramid generates an amazing amount of power. And we'll get to the details of that and how that might work in a minute here. But he said that at the base of all four corners, they had built a little station to monitor the amount of power that this thing actually put off. Okay, so they're constantly monitoring the actual wattage of this structure. Now, put a pin in that. We're going to go off to another guy named Lee Pearson. Lee Pearson, 1978, preceding all the other claims and stories about this. Okay, and this is wild because this is going to potentially date back to 78. Now, this Johnson guy goes back to the 50s, and apparently he worked there for quite some time. The problem with the Johnson story is it does pretty much end there. The Pearson story is that he's talking to some of his buddies on some sort of military base, talking to some of his old friends. They didn't really cover what Pearson had done to have old buddies in 78. Was he part of Vietnam? Was he a part of Korea? Was he part of intelligence? We don't know. But he must have had some sort of clearance because this buddy goes, you know what? I fly a helicopter that supplies various locations in Alaska. Would you be interested in coming with me on a kind of a wild little mission? It's going to be fairly, long flight, very quick drop off, and we're going to come back. The dude says, sure, man, absolutely. I would love to do that, right? Get back in the game just for a day. So they hop inside this helicopter, and it starts flying right towards this point, okay? Now his buddy, who's the pilot, goes, okay, here's the deal. When we get close to the drop-off, you're going to hear a bunch of alarms go off on this helicopter. Don't panic. We're going to go VFR, and we'll land. I'll land it with my eyeballs, right? VFR is when you turn off all autopilot systems, and you basically fly by sight, which is kind of terrifying if you were in a storm. You literally could only fly to this location if there was going to be clean weather the whole time, because the second you get a storm, you lose all orientation, and that's where you get a Colby accident, right? Instead of fog, it'd be snow. But the alarms go off, just like he said. He goes to VFR. He lands. Now, according to the Lee Pearson guy, he goes, there was a bunch of weird supply containers everywhere. Like it's in mid-function. Like it's really just either being set up or they are just sort of in some disarray. Still, there's no base necessarily. But they hop out of the helicopter, and there's dudes that run up to the helicopter in black uniforms with no insignia on them at all. And they're dragging things out of the helicopter, apparently maybe putting a few things on. We don't know. But Pearson said he's looking out into the woods, including a Jeep with a 50 cal gun on it, and they're all pointing the guns right at them. He turns to his buddy. He's like, oh my God, what the hell's going on? He's like, don't worry. This is normal. Don't say anything. Chill out. He does. He's military. They finish the maneuver, hop back in. Helicopter starts going west, back to where it came from. And sure enough, the VFR is no longer needed. As soon as they get out of the area, boom, all the other sensors come back on. They can fly by instruments and get home. Now, while he was there, he also mentioned that a C-130 seemed to be doing some weird patrol overhead. And C-130s, unless they're turned into the Flying Fortress, that would be kind of a weird plane to be up there because it's a real slow-moving thing, right? Unless it has some AWACS system on it, which is really trying to figure out what's going on. Now, there were claims that this was a no-fly zone, a bit like Area 51. The only problem with that story is that if that was ever a no-fly zone, it's not a recent thing, okay? Because Pearson's son chartered a plane. He's the one that flew out, and you can see the footage where he basically zooms down on the ground, and there was kind of a bald patch in the forest down there, plus this overgrown runway and this overgrown road they could see. And obviously no one could drive on these overgrown roads, so it was sort of like the Andromeda strain, which is a movie about a virus that comes from an outer space probe that's microscopic, but it was starting to kill everything in a particular town. So they grabbed the probe and a couple survivors, and they put them in this special base. It's all fictional at the south tip of Nevada. And they claim in the front of the movie it's all true, which is kind of funny. And then they have to detox to get down inside there. So they had to go down inside to make this happen. But they talked about in the movie clearing the road to make it look like nobody had ever built anything in the area where they built this giant base. Now, the interesting thing, I'll remind you guys, your OG listeners, you'll remember this being said a couple times on the show. The soldiers with no insignia on them. There was, out of all of the stories that Dr. Stephen Greer has covered in his Disclosure Project, I think I've told you I've watched dozens and dozens of them. I think there's about 125 interviews up there, and it's just exhausting to watch. You will see, folks, that if you're just kind of hip on body language, you'll realize that they're not quite telling the truth. And every single time they say alien, they touch their ears, their nose, they go through all these signature signs that they're lying, okay? And that they're not very good at it, right? It's like Don Bongino saying that Epstein killed himself. You've never seen a guy blink more in his life, right? For some reason, he's saying that. Don't know why. Okay. But one of the most convincing stories, I believe, was one of our soldiers, American soldiers, stationed in Chile, and they had an aircraft crash into a mountainside. And so his little squad was called up to go down and figure out what the hell happened. Took them a long time because when they finally saw it, it was way down on the hill, and there's not a lot of direct roads to go down, several hundred feet. So they had to go way, way down, turn around, and come back. What they found, according to this guy, which I'm telling you, his body language was the most authentic body language I've ever seen. If he's a liar, he's a great liar. And he had sort of broken English too, which I like because he's not this super Ivy League liar that might be in an intelligence agency, right? But he clearly said that a tear-shaped vehicle had slammed into the mountainside and was now dripping this goo onto the ground. He said that the metal was a very metallic, purpley, kind of petroleum-looking metal. He said that when he got close to the vehicle with all of his buddies, he says they could all feel the beings inside, that they were basically sending a message out to the squad that found them that they're okay and not to worry. But why am I mentioning this? Because the last part of his story is, he said, from the east, these ships, these anti-gravity ships, landed right next to them, and out popped American soldiers, basically American by their genetics and by their spoken language and dialect. Okay, I mean, they didn't have Scottish accents or British accents. And that they wore black uniforms with no insignia. He said a guy came up to them and started just chewing them out, that kind of trauma programming thing, right? Like they do in basic training. The reason why drill sergeants yell at the kids is to start clearing their brains, right? Yell, 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 yell. And it just wipes out any thought you think you're going to bring to basic training. You're going to tell a guy off. You think you're going to do one. They're screaming at you for a reason, to wipe your brain. So that he claimed that he was held in a vehicle for 14 hours and that the guy was jabbing him with a machine gun in his chest and telling him that he didn't see anything. But the guy was actually fairly resistant. Even in the interview, he was telling him, like, yeah, I was just saying whatever this guy wanted me to say, and I was thinking, F this guy, right? So that's the second story I've heard about black uniform American soldiers participating in some secret stuff. Now, if you know anything about maritime law, there might be something to that from a liability standpoint. If you don't identify as an American Army soldier, well, then you can go by completely different rules and be outside of any constitutional graph on you where you have to obey laws. Maritime law was that when, let's say, England and Spain were going to resolve their sea battles and sign a truce, they'd pull up a French ship running a French flag, and instead of the British going on a Spanish ship and following Spanish law on the sea because the flag was Spanish, or same thing for the Spain coming over to England's ship and following English law, they go on the French ship and arbitration with a dead language. They sign an agreement in French because the language is fairly stagnant and they don't have any legalese that could be interpreted different at a future point in time. So they sign the whole treaty in French and sail back home and the war's off. There could be a flavor of that with having uniforms that basically have no insignia on them. Keep that in mind as you hear stories like that in the future. Now, according to the son of the Marty Johnson guy, the 50s dude who went down and worked on the pyramid, when released from that program, he apparently owned a farm. And he supposedly, according to his son, had built a replica out of this thing using aluminum, and that it generated enough power that he kept his entire farm off the grid. I'm not sure how that would work because what we know about this technology using natural substances from the earth or even composite systems or composite materials, you have to have a conductive material and a non-conductive material to create these pyramids that make power, like the ones in Giza and the other several hundred pyramids that are all over all over Egypt, going all the way down to Turkey. We know there's pyramids in the South America and apparently some in China. I will say that there is a distinction you need to make with these observations where you will definitely see, I got an old producer of mine who flies all the time in South America. He married a woman from there, and he has been to all the pyramids in South America that are massive, right? The one distinction of the whole thing is that you don't get to go inside of these other mountainous pyramids. So you have a pyramid shape is a very, I shouldn't say that, a cone shape is very natural for any sedimentary rock. You made them when you were a kid, when you go to the beach and you make a pyramid. You know, you make a not necessarily a pyramid, you make a cylinder, right? Well, man could see that anomaly and then start carving the mountain off to create what they have in Machu Picchu, which is places where you can grow, vegetation on the side of the mountain, right? We do it all the time when we do, grapes, and there's coffee beans and all kinds of wild stuff that grows in mountains, and it's because man excavates off. And you might do it in a way you're creating four sides. So not everything that you see has an interior with chambers that might actually facilitate this particular functionality, but we do have hundreds of pyramids on planet Earth. The ones in South America that are Aztec pyramids with steps on them and that kind of stuff, they may or may not be this exact kind of species because they're not exactly built the same way, and they seem to have very human functions attached to them, like stairs and that kind of stuff. You won't find stairs on the ones that generate electricity because you're not supposed to be on top of them when they're on, right? Now Lee Pearson's son was the one that brought us the Lee Pearson story. He's the one that flew out there and saw some pretty strange stuff in the area. It's actually really cool that he did that because then we have something to kind of apply to the story, right? But another dude named Nathan Campbell, a random citizen of America, I think, could have been Canadian, but I think he's American. He said, I'm going to go find this pyramid. He was a wilderness guy. He put together a kit to stay out there for 4 weeks. He even had a satellite radio system, and the internet existed. So he was reporting in his daily events with pictures and stories, just blogging out there by himself. He's out there for 2 weeks, and then his transmissions go blank. His last transmission was he's going to get water. Now, if he's out there for 2 weeks, I'll tell you, and anybody who's ever done this, once you find water, you keep going back to the same source. Now, water also brings in wildlife like bears and that kind of stuff, right? So you could get mauled by a bear. You wouldn't necessarily find a skeleton. You wouldn't necessarily find the person. But obviously, a fair amount of people logically conclude maybe he found it. Maybe he stepped on the wrong thing, right? Quite frankly, could have stepped on a landmine. But the idea is, some people think he was deleted, captured and deleted, meaning you don't have to kill the guy, but if you want to know about this pyramid, well, you're gonna work for us, okay? I don't know anything about the gentleman and his qualifications to decipher anything like that. A lot of you are dangerous enough that you could easily be incorporated into a project like that, and you might go in with a grin from ear to ear. I love it, right? I mean, I would personally work at S4 if it ever was proven to exist, because it has 9 alien craft in it, right? So before we go into the pyramid and all of its mechanics, based on what we discovered from both the pyramids of Giza, as well as the other Black Pyramid, which is the one that exploded in Egypt, and the Wardenclyffe Tower that Tesla built, which is based off the same thing, plus his test in Springfield, Colorado, which catalyzed his plans for the Wardenclyffe Tower. Before we get into that, there's one other kind of string of the more fringy part of this story, which again, remember the way that they bring you disinformation. 80% truth, 20% fiction. This might be the 20% that's spread on top to make this thing start to vanish. And they really want you to ingest it in that order. They want you to get all the legitimate stuff, and then they want you to feel foolish that you ever listened to the story in the first place by the fiction that's put on top of it. Okay? I'll give you a really strange case in point. When you watch the movie What the Bleep Do We Know, you have these incredible scientists in the show that, from a medical standpoint, a physics standpoint, and then they bring in this woman who's a channeler. She's in it. And one of our listeners knows all about her because he went to her camp and to rescue a friend and just saw that it was just a complete cult of BS, okay? So this location is inside something called the Alaska Triangle. I'm going to try to find an image of Alaska Triangle because I don't know anything about it, quite frankly. But they have had a supposed clandestine secret project called Project Stargate. And, there's a lot of AI stuff online about how Stargates are real and all this other stuff. I would ask anyone to sort of tell me how that would work. Just because you make a Stargate from a movie that Kurt Russell's in out of stone or something, now what, But the Project Stargate was mainly focused on this remote viewing thing. And I have a whole episode on remote viewing if you want to see a detailed analysis of it, okay? But remote viewing, most of you probably know what it is, but if you don't know what it is, it's a method of meditating and sort of astral projecting your consciousness out of your body. And it's as how do I say this? The claim is that if you just simply think about GPS coordinates, having no knowledge of how they work, that you can suddenly find a location on Earth and start looking around. So this is where it gets all fringy. There was a gentleman, Pat Price, was supposed to be the most talented remote viewer in American, intelligence. And the weird thing is, the story goes like this. He met a woman, no name, that said that she had found basically the Black Pyramid through this remote viewing, which is interesting because if you didn't know something was there, why on earth would you look around? I mean, that would be very strange. Well, let's just go into Mount Everest in my brain. But what she said was that she had found the building that the Johnson guy found, went down the elevator, surfed all around this base, and then actually saw the pyramid. First, she saw like a slanted dark rock. Then she pulled back and she saw the pyramid. Then she surfed around the base, found some commanders talking to each other, who were then sent on a tour of the facility by a humanoid being, but not a human, who was telling them what this thing does, which we're going to get into. Now, it should be mentioned that Alaska supposedly has up to 6,500 UFO sightings that have been documented in the area. Remember, Puget Sound has a wild thing, which I covered in my Men in Black episode, because it's one of the most convincing Men in Black and sort of hidden UFO sightings before Roswell. Same year, but months earlier. Now let's get into what they said about the pyramid itself and its purpose. The interesting thing about what they have said about this, and again, this is like word of mouth. There's no physical evidence whatsoever of this thing existing, meaning there's no photographs. No one snuck a piece out of the rock. There's no physical evidence. This is all just hearsay. And again, it was catalyzed into existence in 2012 by this Linda Howe. And again, we don't need to blame her for being investigative about this story. I remember being very connected in Hollywood and finding out about the documentary filmmaker for HBO. It's a female, and I can't remember her name, but she had done something that was great, and the government supposedly, this is like people that I know that were near this event, okay, telling me that she had been pulled aside by the government, taken to one of those sort of construction mobile homes on the side of a road, pulled inside, shown albums and albums of photographs. This was covered on like the History's Mysteries or Sci-Fi Channel or something at one point. She was shown a bunch of stuff, a bunch of alien pictures and all this good stuff about aliens, and that she was going to be chosen, that she had been chosen to crack the story to the world. So she goes back to HBO and says, oh my gosh, I'm the one, and we're going to blow this thing up, and HBO is going to be the, pay-per-view channel that's going to blow this thing up. Well, shortly after that, she doesn't get any more contact anymore. She travels back to this location, and the whole thing's gone. And of course, she loses complete communication with this, and so she looks like an idiot to HBO. Okay. Pyramids generating power. Well, the Johnson guy, I think the source came from him because he was one of the scientists that claimed to be working on this or studying it, They use the term quantum field to talk about what I talk about on the show as ether. Doesn't really matter. I don't get offended they're calling it the quantum field, but is the natural field of energy that builds the entire universe. Everything is this thing. It's the most fundamental field of energy in the universe. And so it is generating everything that you see. You are being generated by this every split second of your life. If you were ever completely put in a vacuum and this field couldn't get to your body, you would cease to exist as a physical being. Now, your soul probably just floats off, but that's how fundamental this energy is. So one of the theories that they suggested was that these pyramids were built on Earth to transmit electricity straight up, and that alien spacecraft use these little pyramids to re-energize their engines. Now, the only way that makes sense to me, and we're going to get into all this, is if they needed to make a huge jump from one place to another. That would be the only thing that would explain that to me, and even that is kind of fringy. But before we get into UFOs and how they fly, let's go back to the pyramids and generating power. So when the electrical engineers, I believe it was from 2008 to 2010, they studied the Great Pyramid, and they said, just go in there and forget everything you've ever were told about these things being tombs, and just look at it. The guy who had a doctorate in electrical engineering from New York comes out of that, I think it was 45 days or so he spent examining the pyramids, and they said, what do you think they are? And his comment back was, quote, I wouldn't want to be in it when it's turned on. And they said, okay, all right, tell us what you're thinking here. And he says, well, it's not a tomb by any means, right? Everything that tombs are, if you go to the Valley of the Kings or the Valley of the Queens, the tombs have very specific things that are going on inside them. He said, did you notice this pyramid is made out of 3 different types of rocks? 2 different types of limestones, one being conductive on the inside, which is all the rocks you can see today, and that little capstone up there, that's a different type of limestone that is non-conductive. I personally am not a geologist. I don't know exactly. It would have to be I would think the more conductive material would probably be more crystallized, and the non-conductive would be more chaotic inside. But he also said that the hallways are lined with red granite, which is a level 9 rock. Both these are level 9 rocks, as far as I understand. He goes, that's what we call in geology a liquid rock. Not liquid because it's malleable like liquid, but because it actually transmits any electricity over its surface unimpeded for the most part. So he said if you were to put the outside valence stone on the pyramid like it was originally created, then this quantum field, or ether, goes through the pyramid because it's making the pyramid exist, and anything that's not used can capacitate inside the pyramid. Now the pyramids, we also know, are on a plateau that's taller than the pyramid. Well, the Great Pyramid is 450 some feet tall. That would mean the plateau is at least probably 500 feet tall. But they also bumped into a guy who was a sort of an Egyptian mason there. He's in the documentary. And he goes, look, he goes, down below is a big catacomb of water. He goes, when I was a kid, this guy's 85 years old. It looks like he's 60. He says, we used to play in that, but you can't get down there anymore. He said when this thing was on, it would capacitate up two different things. It's built in an aqua ravine or an aquifer. So there's a bunch of rock down below with natural spring water coming up underneath the pyramids. At least it did back in the day. Well, that's going to allow the core of the earth, which is all electricity. It's all plasma. It's not nickel iron, because nickel iron, again, loses all of its magnetism at 6,500 degrees Fahrenheit. You should be able to say that in 2 seconds if someone starts going off on it. It's all plasma. It's like electricity, like a lightning bolt. Lightning bolt is the first time you can see this quantum field. When it slows down to the speed of a lightning bolt, you can see it. Again, when lightning bolts hit trees, they want to go down towards the center of the earth, ground. They love the fact that it's got roots down inside, so it's always striking the tallest structure that has roots especially. And that can hit humans as well, but it's usually hitting something else in the neighborhood. When you see volcanoes, you see it sprout out of the volcano because that's just the aperture of electricity from down below making its way out. You see this all the time. It can also strike a volcano, but it's usually more coming out than going in. It's very interesting. Pay attention to those videos when you see them. You post a lot of those videos on our Telegram channel. Just go to deepthoughtsradio.com and join the Telegram channel so you can see them. Just look for the word volcano and search our channel. You'll see videos of it. So this pyramid is grabbing everything that's sweeping by the surface of Earth, and it's capacitating all the quantum field that's passing through it like a big battery. Then it charges it down to the plateau, and it's using water as a conductive material across the water. Of course, it's all DC, so it's not this horrible lethal AC, right? And then you have the natural energy coming up underneath, also charging the plateau. What the guy said was, in this documentary, he goes, you think all these things are temples and other weird structures. He goes, a lot of these are hospitals. He goes, you see those quartz things that have been pulled off to the side. He goes, a lot of these are beds, court beds. And he goes, the doctor would interview a person, find out how sick they are, lay them on the quartz bed. And he goes, you see this hole right here. He would put an iron staff made of meteorites down into the hole and bridge the electricity from the water in the plateau to the bed. And he would keep it on for however long he thought you needed it to vibrate out all of the sort of Royal Raymond Rife cancers and viruses you had in your body, basically deworming you through electricity by just simply shattering them with electricity. Amazing information from a guy who's just, wearing his native clothing, just a big sheet of cloth. He also took him inside the Great Pyramid where you have that inverted step inside. And he goes, this is all acoustical too. So it's built to amplify what's going on in here. And he sings a note and it harmonizes in the room. And all these dudes are looking at each other going, this is the first time any human being ever sang a note in here? So put a pin in that in your brain. Now, follow Nikola Tesla's entire life, right? Everything he ever created by his own admission in his own writings is all ethereal based, which now they might call the quantum field. Whoop-de-doo, different name for the same thing. He moves to, very specifically, Springfield, Colorado. The guy was from New York. When he landed here in, 1870s, he was in New York City. Why would he go to Springfield, Colorado? Because he had a theory. He found a natural aquifer in the ground where it was bringing up this natural electricity from the water supply. He built the big Tesla, which you see that picture of Tesla reading the book with the gigantic electrical, storm going on in the room. He built 2 Tesla coils to pull that thing off. He put a little bit of amperage into the ground, and he built another Tesla coil to bring it out. So he created a siphon. That electric discharge you see in that photograph lasted for 60 seconds and would have continued going forever had his assistant not broken the breaker to kill the circuit. So when he found that out, when he proved that to himself, he's like, oh my gosh, the earth is full of nothing but electricity. Far more than we need in order to power the world. So knowing what he knew about power, if you go see my episode on scalar pulses, you'll find out how the Wardenclyffe Tower works. He masterminds the Wardenclyffe Tower. Built on an aquifer. Big cement foundation. And then he built this gigantic tower on top with the big sphere on top. Now, the short and dirty of that episode is that he was going to broadcast half of what it takes to make electricity. The scalar pulse carrying the dielectric wave to every single conductive material that wanted to generate power. Your radio, your television, eventually your cell phone, your stereo. And when mixed with the magnetism wave, which is the orbital wave, which is local, when you have the concussive ricochet of the dielectric wave off of that, you get electromagnetism. An electron, aka power. So that's what he was going to do. So now, the theory that these things, this dark pyramid, is buried way underneath the ground, which, let me just tell you, 700 feet to 100 feet of rock above you is going to kill a signal like crazy. So if this thing is truly beaming a signal straight up, one, anything even close to the top of the pyramid would probably be obliterated if it had any conductivity to it. So a piece of metal, anything that gets close to the top of that pyramid is going to be just vaporized, all right? I've told this story before. One of the books that I bought from the original archaeologists who conquered Egypt, he was eating lunch on top of the Great Pyramid, and he's noticing that all of the silverware is sparking badly, like in wintertime when you touch the doorknob and you get that gigantic pop in your finger, right? So immediately he builds kind of a makeshift Baghdad battery. He takes a linen cloth, puts it over a wine bottle, sticks a fork in it or a knife in it, holds it over his head. He said immediately a little lightning bolt happened and hit one of his workers who fell down a few of the steps on the pyramid, right? And they attacked him. And they said that he was using witchcraft against them. Finally, he calmed them all down and didn't die. But he proved, he goes, oh my God, this thing generates power. And of course, the guy was not an electrical engineer. He was an archaeologist, so it kind of died with him. But he recorded that in his writings, okay? So UFOs, needing a huge battery charge. What do we know from this same ilk of information, which could be whistleblower disinformation or it could be truthful information? Well, we've got a Bob Lazar, which again, I've done a whole episode on him, but if you're interested in him, you should go see it. It'll tighten your perspective of who that guy is. He says he has 2 degrees, one from Caltech and one from MIT. Absolutely no proof that that ever occurred, and you don't need to look in the books of the actual educational institution if you say, oh, they erased him, that's why he doesn't have the ability to prove he has a degree. Degrees take a while to get. So just in short, you would take a photograph of wearing the jerseys and the paraphernalia from that university. There's no way a kid from the Los Angeles area is going to go to Massachusetts and get one of the highest degrees you could possibly get in physics and not buy a t-shirt that says MIT on it from that era. You take photographs, you take photographs, you get a 110 camera and you take a photograph. He was in the 80s doing this, plenty of camcorders, all that kind of stuff. There'd be some proof that he'd been to these 2 locations at the highest level. In addition, you would have neighbors and family members that are like, this guy went to those colleges. We missed him. He was gone. Even if you attest out of a PhD and you can somehow write your PhD thesis, it's going to take 6 months to a year if you're just a God prodigy of all this information, okay? Well, he said that he was taken from the private sector after building, turbine jet engine cars and writing software for a brothel so they could track, license plates of police officers so they would know when to show the goods and when not to show the goods. He went from that lifestyle into these 2 massive degrees, and which can happen. I mean, guys like that get bored of life and they do that kind of stuff. It doesn't mean one doesn't cancel the other. But he said he worked for Area 51, but they took him very quickly to another facility south of 51, which has never been identified on a map ever that I know of, called S4, which was a mountainside that opens up. It looks like a mountain on the door. It opens up, you go inside, and he said, there was, I think he said 9 vehicles, 8 of which had some form of damage on them, and one that was what he called the supermodel, right? It was the one that looked absolutely perfect, and it's the 1950s. It's the one I fly in the season 5 intro. Now, what he said with that vehicle, especially in his it's either Netflix or HBO special on himself, but they said that they had mastered this element 215, something that doesn't naturally occur, and that this resonates basically the quantum field naturally, and that they had found at the center of this supermodel vehicle and the other 8 that were also injured, that this was in the center of, so horizontally and vertically centered in the vehicle, and that they had run leads off into the exoskeleton or the endoskeleton of the ship, which is metal, down into antimatter engines. It sounded like he had 2 configurations, one with 3 engines, one with 4. So you would have either 3 arcs coming off this or 4. And his job was to figure out the antimatter engines. But in his special that happened a few years ago, he said that they had actually looked like they had made a cylinder out of 215, which we created it for a moment in a laboratory in 2003. In the documentary, they said it's never been done, it's never been made. Well, it has been. They just don't have like pieces of it, right? But he said that they had cut it in wafers like coins. And then they flipped the coin over, every other coin over, like when you take 2 magnets and you put them positive to positive or negative to negative, you feel that pressure that pushes away, right? He said somehow they got it to stabilize like that. Then they cut it into a cone, and then they shaved 2 sides of it down. And that's the shape of the 215 at the center of the ship. And that creates a quantum field that then feeds and gets catalyzed into these antimatter engines. Now, what's funny about anyone saying antimatter engine is, how would you know? I mean, how would you be able to get these things open, take a look inside, and be able to measure and survey the atomic transformations into antimatter in these engines? So the claim that they're antimatter is probably more sci-fi than anything else. And you wouldn't need antimatter technically to pull off what he's saying in terms of the control of the quantum field around a spaceship, okay? But a disc-shaped vehicle is probably the most harmonic shape for a sacred geometry moment on the outside of the ship. The way that the ship would fly would be to take the shape of the ship, run this power system on the outside of the ship, so it creates a field around the ship. How does that make you fly? Well, gravity is defined improperly in all the science books around the world as 2 atoms that actually know how to communicate with each other, thus creating pull. That is complete bunk, which is why a lot of old books and recent entries, they've actually moved this out of Wikipedia, but 5 years ago it was in Wikipedia. The word phenomenon always travels with the theory of gravity because it makes no physical sense whatsoever. When you look at the theory of gravity up until pretty much Tesla's death, for those old school guys who invented everything that you're using today, not the guys like Einstein invented nothing and claimed he invented everything, right? The older guys would constantly talk about the ethereal winds of the universe creating a pressure system that is all gravity. The reason why the moon is attracted to the Earth is that the Earth is blocking a tremendous amount of the ether with its plasma core that would normally hit the moon in the face and push it away from us or make it some willy-nilly thing flying in the universe. The sun is so big that it blocks enough that all the planets hang on to the sun. It's a negative pressure once you create an obstruction in the quantum field that is the universe, i.e. the winds of ether, okay? So the way these ships work, theoretically, okay, is if they want to go up, for instance, they will bend that wave above the actual geometric design of the ship, creating a gravity well. Even Bob Lazar talks about this, but he never talks about it either. It's strange. So you lift that up so that the amount of quantum field that's pushing on the ship and the pressure box that is the universe lightens up. And so the ship falls into the hole. It falls into the gravity well where there is no gravity, or a lot less gravity, okay? He also claimed, quite logically, that since the engines hang down in the bottom compartment of the ship, that in order to leave Earth very quickly and travel the universe very quickly, they turn upside down just before they jump. They can move around Earth fine, heads up, tails down, right? But when they want to leave, they flip upside down, and those engines harmonize to create a huge gravity well underneath the ship. Then the natural pressure system, which is like every other, like water pressure, air pressure, pushes the other side of the ship into that hole, and now it's flying super duper fast. And as long as the engine can capture the field off the 215, which is fed by the quantum field that is the universe, right? It can always go where it wants at maximum speed. Now, the only caveat to that is when you have three ships, they all line up on each other, and just like NASCAR, they draft each other's gravity field. And those of you who are big Star Trek fans, you know the warp field theory is actually pretty decent in Star Trek. The shape of the ship's weird, but they have combined fields several times in episodes where two ships will fly inside one field, or they encapsulate one ship inside their field and they all move along, right? Technically, it kind of makes sense. It'd be a hell of a thing to solve mathematically, but that's the 21st century, 24th century. So, the notion that a ship needs to recharge by flying over the Dark Pyramid with a tremendous amount of rock between the pyramid and the actual vehicle above, that's kind of weird. You would think that anything above the pyramid would be literally liquidated. So if there was a white building, for instance, which isn't the claim at all, but if that white building was positioned a little further over, you're talking about total vaporization. If a car were to happen to drive over that rock, which probably is a mountain that's not, traversable, a helicopter, a plane, anything that's flying over the vector of that energy coming straight up, if that theory were true, that whole vehicle would just burst into nothing. It would just, everybody be fried to death, right? The humans would be non-conductive, but they would boil because the ship is boiling, right? So I personally am extremely skeptical of anything that is charging up alien spacecraft. Now, one of the things in my Egyptology episodes that we mention every once in a while is that when you study all the hieroglyphs, I used to go to Stanford University to buy all of the archaeological old school books with publication dates in the 20s, the 1920s and before, okay? Very little censorship at all. But they had, I think I had the majority of all the hieroglyphs ever discovered fully translated in these books. That was the point of the purchase. I just donated them all to the Huntington Beach Library. They don't mention the pyramids. They do not mention the pyramid. The shape of a pyramid is an icon that means gift, okay? I just said this in a recent episode. The weird thing about that would mean that either the pyramids were covered up, which is hard to believe, or they were built after all these hieroglyphs were carved into these rocks, okay? And again, you have things like this story that the prodigal son story from the Bibles in hieroglyphs first. I mean, no one ever said it wasn't there, but you have to understand that's how far back it goes. They have poetry. They have all kinds of beautiful stuff they talk about in their hieroglyphs. Some of you have seen the basalt rock tombs. They look like caskets, but they're freaking massive. They're amazingly precisely built. We believe that all of the writing on the outside of these boxes was very recently done because they're horrific. When you go see hieroglyphs anywhere in Egypt and you look at these big giant boxes, this is the most scribbled, imprecise hieroglyphs you've ever seen, as if somebody put it on there to claim it as part of modern Egypt, which is not the same race that built anything down there. If you take all the hieroglyphs back, okay, and you start with the color ones and you start looking at the color of the skin that they were painting, the further back it goes, the darker and darker and darker these people get, with the full ability to render anything that they understood. I mean, the stonework is nothing shy of miracle level stonework, okay? This is where you get this alien civilization thing. But what would it be? What would a dark pyramid be in Alaska, of all places? I mean, it is not the most friendly territory at all. So it does seem like an outpost of some sort, generating electricity of some sort. And according to the claims with no physical evidence, a lot of electricity. It has not been calculated to my knowledge that if you took all the pyramids that have been stripped down and you rebuilt them, the outside, valence rock on it, as to how much would the Great Pyramid make. If you look at all the pyramids in Giza, something very interesting will dawn on you if you consider that they might generate power. Look at a satellite photograph of Giza. Just get on Google Maps and take a look, Google Earth or whatever, right? You'll see a consecutive row of pyramids that continually get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until you get the big three. Well, one of the biggest problems in trying to figure out how these pyramids were built was, how do you get light inside the pyramid to finish anything internally? Because you can't use mirrors. And one thing you need to understand, mirrors aren't like some ancient technology that goes back 10,000 years. Creating a mirror was very difficult to do. You have to create some sort of reflective natural metal and then polish the hell out of it. And then you have to encapsulate in something. Usually we use glass and that kind of stuff with modern mirrors. But even some of the best mirrors that NASA creates, after 4 reflections, and if you go down to Walmart and you bought 4 mirrors and you reflected 4 times, you barely got any light coming out the 4th bend. Now, a NASA mirror might be able to go 10 bounces, maybe. But I doubt they had that level of precision back in those days. So having light inside the pyramid is a thing you got to do. All right, you start looking at these hieroglyphs where these gigantic dudes are hanging on to what looks like a big bulb with a filament shaped like a serpent. Of course, everything Egyptians did, or these pre-Egyptian folks, was always artistic. The whole language of hieroglyphs is all beauty. If your name was Sebastian, for instance, give yourself quite a few letters in your name. There was an era where there was no vowels. It was all consonants, and you just simply made up the vowels as you read. But when you have a cartouche, which is a round rectangle with a line on one side, you read into the line, okay? So as the first letters go in, right, into the back of the cartouche. And usually if you're royalty, there's an icon that you were royalty sitting in the back. It's not part of your name. It's an icon that means your designation in society. But when you look at the way everything is arranged, they would arrange the letters depending on what's going on, where that cartouche exists, whether it's vertical, horizontal, sideways, part of a door jamb. They would arrange the symbols to look pretty. So all the letters could scramble, except the first one and the last one. How many of you have seen that phenomenon on online, where you can read a paragraph of English or French or German or whatever, and as long as the first letter and the last letter of the word is in the right position, you can read a scrambled paragraph fluently. You ever wonder how that's possible? Because our original DNA did that. It was artistic. And it could be out of this world DNA. It could be, not everything came out of Northern Africa sort of thing. That has been debunked several times, okay? So this hidden pyramid, they've also theorized that these pyramids would transmit power between them, sort of like a big circuit. I don't know how that would ever be the case, because you would have to vector through design, through some physical object that's not going to move. A pyramid is just a pyramid. It doesn't have like some swivel top on it, right? How you would get it to being left and right and go between things doesn't quite make any sense to me. Maybe one of you could explain it to me. But, and they're also thousands of miles away from each other. But there is that, we're going to do a little Egyptology here to finish this thing off. There is a bizarre sort of explosion that seemed to have occurred in Egypt. There are burn marks all over Egypt and this one vector away from this one center point. And I believe the Black Pyramid is very close to that center point where it looks like it actually exploded, okay? And that's not the one we're talking about. This is one that's just a charred black pyramid. And you can see all the rocks just dissolved. I mean, just kind of blasted around the base of this thing. But like I've said several times on the show, you have statues made of quartz that are knocked over. all these statues that are made of the slices of stone, right? They're all knocked over in the vector away from this center point. And then, of course, the pyramids don't have their valence stones on them. Oddly, in South America, you also have a big burn mark that comes across in South Africa or South America, which burned buildings and melted stone. But the quartz that this one group found had toes, obviously carved into this bust of this big giant, guy sitting down in the chair thing, and it was boiled. And this geologist is there, and she goes, "Look, man, in order to boil quartz, you have to hit like 2,500 degrees Celsius to start a boil." And she goes, "I can tell you right now, because this is just flash burned, it's just the outer surface of this thing, something came by super hot and burned and knocked this thing down." And there's theories of, the center of the Milky Way, the center of our galaxy sent this gigantic beam towards Earth. Absolutely ridiculous. You don't need that. If you built 120 step pyramids or bent pyramids and all those other pyramids all over the region, and you're siphoning electricity out of the bowels of the earth, what do you think is going to happen? You're going to get some sort of arcing, amazing overload that could literally blast out from a pyramid that looks like it exploded and burned black, and it kills all the people. It just fries them. Or, there's plenty of people left after this kind of thing would happen. But once you figure out that you overbuilt this electrical network of pyramids, whoever's the pharaoh, whoever's in charge goes, yank the stones off of this thing. We've overbuilt. We've overstimulated the siphoning of electricity, just like Tesla did for his coil in Colorado Springs. Sadly, Wardenclyffe got sabotaged by JP Morgan, who was going to sell you a unit of power when you could be getting it for free. Now, the other interesting theory is that we take for granted, if you really subscribe to this notion that it really exists with no physical proof in your life, right? If you have proof, share it with the show, that aliens are involved. When you study the pyramids in Giza, and you want to watch the video channel, I can't remember who it is, but there's a guy out there that studies every single rock, especially in the top of the Great Pyramid where you've got the valence stones on the top, right? Parameridian stones missing. He lays out how they built this thing, where they positioned every single rock, and the logic of its design. When you start looking at those videos and thinking about alien technology being extremely precise, why wouldn't they build it precise, right? And again, these stones are incredibly precise, right? You've got, I believe, 60-foot stones in the pyramids that don't waver but a 500th of an inch. I mean, like, whoa, right? These are like 80-ton stones. Not to mention the temple in Baalbek, which doesn't get any alien artifacting, but they have 1,000-ton stones that build the foundation of that temple over there in Baalbek. You don't really see alien precision in any of the pyramids in Egypt. Whatever we are, wherever we came from, we may have been I would say very human in building this with some superior technology to move big stones like that, however we did it, all right? I do believe that from the G.E. Kincaid story of the Egyptian find in the Grand Canyon, and the fact that they used to say that they burned pharaohs inside of trains back in the day as fuel. This is a famous old phrase that, they said pharaohs burn hotter than coal. If you really want to get to where you're going, you got to burn pharaohs, right? As if they had found tons of Egyptian history here in the Americas that they needed to erase to basically say this is totally ours. Native Americans talked about the people that were before them, the big people. And there was obviously from Magellan to his successor 30 years later, said they found gigantic human races. Go see my episode on giants and pygmies for all the details on that. But we did find what looks like Egyptian stuff all over the place. And Utah supposedly has a bunch of it too. But if you're trying to curb people's belief systems to a particular religious doctrine, you don't want to have any other competing game. So you work to hide and destroy anything that's out there. All the destroyed hieroglyphs in Egypt, they blame it on, the people that conquered each other. But I'm willing to bet it was, the Roman Catholic Church going down there and wipe out these folks so we don't have any competitors. Okay. Now, for those of you who think you've seen hieroglyphs that dictate how they were pouring, they put things on sleds and they poured, water in front of the sled. Most of those are European archaeologists from the 1800s, the late 1800s, theorizing in drawings that when you look at them and you don't know hieroglyphs, you think that they're hieroglyphs. You think, oh, that's so in the style of hieroglyphs, right? A lot of the pyramids in South America where they try to continue the narrative that these were savage people that deserved to be killed, okay? They'll climb up to the top of one of the step pyramids right down there. And one of the ones I saw was that they just recently ran the story again, a pit of like baby bones in this thing, right? As if bones are going to last thousands of years at the top of this thing. But there was several accounts where in very European styled illustration, some priest holding up a baby and they did all the blood dots coming down from it, as if you had the masterful ability to build a step pyramid, but you didn't have the artistic ability, like the Mayans, to carve an embossed signature of the priest killing a baby. I mean, if that's really what you think that we're doing, they would most likely signify that in a much bigger way than some paint on a stone, right? From all of my sort of shady tree studying of archaeology in South America through Brian Forrester, who's a guy you should definitely subscribe to if you're interested in this stuff. He's been to Machu Picchu like 65 times. And he brings geologists with him, right? The beautiful thing about the South American people that are really native, and especially when we just started discovering this stuff in the 1700s and looking around, they were extremely honest about who built what. And in almost every single account where they start finding these massive structures down there, the native people say it was the people before us. The Incas say it was the people before us. We call them pre-Incas, right? Machu Picchu, through Brian Forrester, he brought a geologist in and she said, look, have you guys realized that every mountain around here is like Switzerland, right? It's all very, coned mountains, right? They all go up and they come down. They all go up and they come down. But Machu Picchu has been shaved. It's been shaved so that they could build the town up there that is known as Machu Picchu. Where's all the excavation evidence? It's really not there. So this thing was there so long that any of the rocks that got knocked off the hill blended in finally with the basin. If they would have the permission to look around down there, you'd probably find all the stones that were at the top. And then a lot of the stones that Machu Picchu is built out of, it's miles away where those stones actually originated. Same thing with Easter Island, until you realize that the ocean was much lower when Easter Island was built, and all those stones just came right off a quarry in the bottom of the ocean about 300 feet down. Now, let's ask a logical question before we close off here. Why would someone, from the military want you to believe that there was some dark pyramid potentially several hundred feet below Earth's surface that generates a bunch of power, thus really, drawing people to that region? Because that's what's going to happen. We've had plenty of people sneak on to the Area 51 area. They're met by the camo guys that then escort them out. Well, unfortunately for Area 51, which is also known as Groom Lake, there's a lot of vistas that look down on it that aren't protected by sort of this eminent domain thing. Again, Bob Lazar, along with John Lear and his and Bob's ex-wife, they got busted up there one night because Bob knew that they're going to start flying some of these vehicles, apparently, according to John Lear, and they captured them on top of the sill because they were watching when they shouldn't be watching. That sounds like they don't want people to know, but it's sort of in a position where you're going to be able to see it from legal viewpoints, from flying a plane and looking over. I mean, you could fly a private plane with a telescope and just look over during the day and start seeing stuff. I'm sure it happens every day with foreign countries doing that to us. If not a balloon from China, right? But Alaska? Well, what if you had a situation where you wanted to vet out, get rid of an element within your country? And so what you do is you create a whole bunch of disinformation. from the shape of the earth to pyramids buried below ground in Alaska, and a ton of different things. There might be two objectives at a minimum. Take things that really exist, like HARP arrays, and cloud them up so bad that people don't know exactly what it is. Create websites that debunk things. And so anybody who doesn't want to believe anything that's inconvenient for their mind, they simply go to a website and, oh, that's debunked. It's actually not that. All right? So it hides a lot of secret projects that are going on every single day by gaslighting the hell out of that area, telling you so many lies about something you can't find the truth anymore. But what if you really wanted to get to the genetic pool within your country that thinks for themselves? Even if they're wrong, even if they lack any acumen to really decipher what they're interested in, you still want to get rid of them. What you really want are the people that think that the emperor still has clothes on, right? So you lay out all these theories. Part of it's to probably en masse embarrass these people so badly that when they say the British are coming, nobody pays attention to them because they're the boy that called wolf, the Aesop fable. And so as they literally find more legitimate things, it's all deep fake now, right? When photos come out of a little island where little people went there, like the elites in Hollywood and all those people went there and royalty went there to abuse people. Well, now it's all deep fake. You can't believe anything that you see. So hold the case back as much as you can. Dump more AI out there and more deep fake out there. So by the time the evidence starts to emerge that is real, everyone who doesn't want to believe goes, well, that's not my celebrity. It's deep fake. But what if you want to really eliminate people? Really eliminate people? Well, you create a honeypot somewhere that's physically possible to get to, but tough to get to. Imagine that. So we get them out there in an element, like this Campbell guy. He's out there by himself. Well, man, he's easy pickings, right? You either delete the guy or you erase the guy. Delete means they keep him and they put him off in some area, or they simply just pick him up and put him away somewhere. You're never going to find his body. One down. And it creates a formidable situation where if you were going to consider looking for it, you hear that story of the Campbell guy and you're not going to do it. Doesn't matter how many guns you bring and all that other kind of stuff. You would literally have to be running video 24/7 out of 50 different cameras to protect yourself as you're roaming around out there. Doesn't mean you can't get arrested. Doesn't mean you can disappear. It'd just be much more televised, right? Again, I've told you guys a couple times, I don't even know if this guy's still alive, but I was, I guess, I want to say mentor, but that's probably too strong of a word, but I was meeting every morning with the guy that he had an investment banking house he sold for $500 million. His cousin was in charge of an alphabet agency at one point in his life, and he was sort of a Jesse Ventura, as he claimed. And he was the size of Jesse Ventura. He's much older. And he was telling me all this wild stuff, and I mentioned to him things like zero-point energy systems, people that can create cars that run on water and all kinds of other things. And he didn't bring it up. I brought it up because we always ate breakfast together. And he goes, oh, yeah. He goes, we get about, a few of those every year. And I said, well, what's the story? Why don't they ever get financed? Why don't they ever come out with their, invention? He says, well, he goes, they always need money, or they at least always want money. They want to get a giant paycheck. None of these guys just want to give it away for free. And if any of them did and published their schematics so that everyone could understand it and build it, that's when the movement wins, right? Push it on the internet so everybody with a piece of Tupperware and a copper wire could build it. He says they usually want to demonstrate their capability. And he flat told me that they meet accidents, right? They get accidented out of society. But he just said it to my face, he said usually they want to travel from point A to point B to show off an engine, show off something. And he goes, they either die coming or they die going. You have to add a lot more dimension to these stories if they're not true. And the thing is that there's videos all over the web about this anomaly. Remember the news station that reported it supposedly in 1992, and there's a bit of a discrepancy from when the Doug guy said he saw that on the air versus when the test actually occurred. He had predated his claim by a few days. And so the test hadn't occurred in China when he first described it, which could easily be just remembering things wrong, of course, right? But why are these other videos always allowed to get out there? If this is so, you're not supposed to know. They can't move the thing, right? You can't move that pyramid. Why would there be derelict runways and roads and a patch of, forest that just didn't grow, Seems like there's something there. Why didn't they find the white building? Did they dig a tunnel from a further distance away to get to the location without being discovered? You would imagine that would be something. But then why would that still exist in any shape or form in the 90s in terms of those roads? If the roads had stopped being used, we definitely had tunneling technology in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. That road that's there that I saw with my own eyes in the video, that would have been obliterated. And why not destroy the road? Why not destroy the runway and plant the native trees in the spot where those were? So, a decade goes by and it's pretty rubbed out. Still there. But the other one too to think about, especially with UFO technology, and I've mentioned this a couple times in episodes, but who would be most nervous about America discovering an alien technology? From microchips to fiber optics to infrared vision, all that kind of stuff. Velcro is not one of those things. Velcro happens naturally in flowers, okay? Well, our competitors would be extremely worried that we just captured something that could quantifiably take us to the next level. One of the big things that they try to put off in alien technology is the invention of the transistor in about 1953, that this was somehow a miracle device. Well, it was a genius device, but hardly a miracle. I mean, you can go look up online exactly how these things are put together and tell me if you're seeing something that man couldn't have serendipitously created. You're talking about men that had been designing machines that were impossible to make, but they were inventing computing machines that were physically going to move levers and notches and things in the 1800s. But they just didn't have the technology to build them. What was it? I think it was the 1890 census. It took like 5 or 6 years, or maybe even up to 8 years, and they were using like CHAD technology, a piece of paper with the notch knocked out of it, to create a machine to feel the notches to figure out what this stuff said. Alan Turing, who I think he was a real guy. I'm not quite sure if this guy is even real. When you look at his entire history, it makes no sense the way he was treated by the government after supposedly building this enigma machine, or the machine to crack the enigma box. Again, no evidence the machine ever existed, but you believe it existed, right? They destroyed it to protect society. What are you talking about? Moore's law would make that machine absolutely obsolete within 5 years. Why destroy one of the most amazing machines? Just put it in the basement of some special place. UK has an Area 51 as well. So just put it there and put it in the base and take photographs of it, put it out there. You don't have to reveal who cares how it works? Big machine learning today would crack any enigma code from the 40s in a matter of milliseconds, right? Probably microseconds. So the fact that they have this piece of history so they can stand up tall to all the other accomplishments, but this guy was a homosexual and he got supposedly chemically castrated, he supposedly kills himself, although that's a dubious claim that no one could prove. They said he ate an apple full of cyanide, but they never tested the apple for any chemicals. So it's all just his entire existence is a photograph and a paper that he wrote that talked about building machines to do things that they couldn't figure out how to build a machine. It was interesting, right? Because it was just too complex. We have the Turing test theory, which is when you talk to an AI and you can't recognize whether it's a human or an AI, it passes the Turing test. So these are sort of logical progressions of technology at times. Zero-point energy, I don't think, has been a mystery for mankind since Tesla designed his Wardenclyffe Tower. They may not have known exactly how he was going to broadcast what he was going to broadcast, but in terms of being able to find infinite sources of energy, the guy that built Coral Castle had an infinite source of energy. It probably wasn't a lot of energy, but it was enough to take 60-ton rocks off the back of a flatbed truck by himself and he only weighed 110 pounds. That's a fact. And then he picked the whole place up and moved it, right? So when you have these countries that have technology that can accomplish all of these things, the only reason why they're not doing it is because society would go nuts with it. Society might turn it into a very bad thing. If you could have an infinite source of power, then anti-gravity would be all over the place. Well, you do not want Joe Schmo anti-gravitying, a 10-ton rock over your house and dropping it on the neighbor because he thinks the guy slept with his wife. I mean, you just don't want that kind of stuff. So they cannot throw that technology out there. So Black Pyramid under a mountain that generates power, that knocks out all communications or knocks out electrical equipment in a disorienting way and not in a power shortage way. That's the weird thing about the whole thing. If this thing was broadcasting energy out in a way that was actually being recognized by electrical equipment, meaning the full electromagnetic wave is coming off this pyramid and not like the Wardenclyffe Tower, which was a dielectric pulse, okay, where you wouldn't know it's doing what it's doing. And 20 miles away, it's only lost 1/20,000th of its concussive power to do what it's going to do, right? Then no helicopter would be losing its instrumentality to fly on autopilot. You wouldn't have to go to VFR. Now, supposedly, fighter pilots that also flew around this weird, uncharted, unsurveyed area also reported, again, no confirmations of any kind, that they would often have instrument problems, which today's technology, if you flew a Gen 5, Gen 6 jet over those areas, you might have a craft just fall right out of the sky because they need the equipment to do part of the job to fly the plane, especially Gen 6. I don't think there's going to be a plane that can fly without power for the rest of our lives. But the other thing would be too, if there's any semblance of truth to the UFO gravity well technology, element 215 or not, and you were to fly by something that's projecting energy into the sky, that would be a docking experience from hell. You're going to have to literally line up your ships because you're maneuvering a ship over supposedly this massive energy beam that's coming out of this pyramid that's apparently insulated better than any electrical source on Earth with 100 to 700 foot of rock, depending on the claims, right? How it would make it out of the rock, I don't even understand how that would work. When we build nuclear power plants, we surround them with concrete, which is not as good as sedimentary rock because it absorbs all the free-flowing electrons that come off this thing. It can contain a lot of the problems that Fukushima had, right? But you need complete control over your quantum field around your ship, i.e. ethereal electricity around the ship, in order to fly, to maneuver. So how could you even get close to this thing to supposedly absorb the power from it? The whole thing just seems a little odd. But we want to pierce this because this is deep thoughts and not just thoughts, right? So for those of you who have been following this, and if I missed anything, please submit some good little logic tidbits in the comments because you guys bless me every once in a while with some amazing comments. If you have not been to deepthoughtsradio.com, I suggest you go. There's tons of episodes, categories up there. I'm finding people all over Southern California that think about this stuff constantly. They have no place to go to actually have a deep thought, to really talk about it. They get an 8-minute video. They get tantalized with repeating and regurgitating known facts or known claims about something, and nothing ever gets analyzed, right? But the second I talk to them and we start breaking stuff down, oh my gosh, their eyeballs light up. So if you're new to the channel, that's your home from now on. Please subscribe because that'll make sure you get the little ding when I come out with a new episode. Do know we're on BitChute and Rumble. They're a little bit behind the rest. We're also on Odyssey. I just updated Rumble and BitChute today. There's probably several I got to put up on Odyssey, but logging into that's a little rough. Also know that season 1's on a different YouTube channel. BitChute probably has the most complete collection. Rumble still has a horrible internal search, so I can't find the videos I'm missing, and even deleting a video is rough when I accidentally uploaded one and they got one off YouTube, okay? That's why there's sometimes 2 of them up there of the same kind. It's so frustrating. But we have a store up there with some pretty cool shirts. Those of you who've been listening for a long time have been picking up the alumni shirt. I love it every time I see that order come through. We have a moon shirt up there, a couple of moon shirts, in case you don't believe we went to the moon. For those of you who have been supporting me on Patreon, thank you so much. It is actually free now, so anyone can go up and you can just join with the 0 tier. If you want to put a donation on there, it's totally up to you. I think $5 is the highest the tier goes. There's a PayPal link up there if you really get aggressive. But definitely go to the website. All the good stuff's up there. Podcast videos, all the social media, the alternate ones in case you don't want to be on the deep state ones. We're on minds.com, Getter, Gab. So get up there, and if you want a notification, even if you want to watch it on YouTube, that's all I post is a link from YouTube up there. But the podcast is cool in case you want to listen to it in your car on the way to work. Plenty of good stuff up there. Make sure and come back and put a comment in if you have a thought. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over and out.